Most people know that pyramids were built as grand tombs for the pharaohs, designed to ensure they had a smooth journey to the afterlife. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, was constructed for the pharaoh Khufu. But what most people don't know is that this whole pyramid building trend started right here, with the step pyramid of Djoser, about 4,700 years ago. This massive structure was built for Pharaoh Djoser, a ruler from Egypt's 3rd dynasty. It rises 7 layers high above the ground and stands about 200 feet tall. We think of it today as a phenomenal architectural project. But for ancient Egyptians, the step pyramid of Djoser turned out to be more like a massive experiment, a trial run, if you will, to perfect their building skills before they moved on to even more ambitious pyramids. Reaching new heights is super exciting, but the real mystery is what is going on below the ground. In this pyramid's underground labyrinth, there is a network of tunnels stretching about 3.5 miles long. And some researchers believe these tunnels might have been part of a sophisticated water system that could completely change what we think about pyramid construction. Let's talk about this massive complex located in Saqqara. Surrounding the pyramid, there's what's known as a dry moat, a continuous trench that is up to 164 feet wide and almost 2 miles long. It forms a sort of rectangular shape around the pyramid. This trench has an average depth of about 65 feet. Now, if you were to add up all the earth and rock they dug out to create this moat, it would be about 10 times the volume of the step pyramid itself. For the longest time, people just assumed this trench was nothing more than a huge quarry, a place where they dug up stone and clay to build the step pyramid. Makes sense, right? But when you take a closer look, it doesn't add up. The trench is too narrow and deep to be practical for mining, and its layout doesn't match anything we know about ancient Egyptian quarrying methods. Plus, some sections of the trench are actually covered with a rocky ceiling, which would have made it nearly impossible to use as a quarry. Another theory suggests that the dry moat had some kind of spiritual significance. Maybe it was a sacred place, where souls of nobles gathered to serve the late king in the afterlife. There are even niches in the walls that work as a hint at this spiritual function. But most researchers believe that this purpose likely developed much later, long after the complex was built for Djoser. So what was the moat really designed for? In 2020, a researcher came up with a pretty intriguing idea. It is possible that this trench was actually designed to collect and manage water, especially after heavy rainfalls. Now, that makes sense when you consider the location. The moat sits in an area that could easily have been flooded by runoff water from nearby plains. This could also explain why the trench wasn't used for new graves until much later when the climate became drier and less prone to flooding. The story becomes even more intriguing, as this trench appears to be part of a larger, more complex hydraulic system within the Djoser complex. It is like the trench has several compartments, carefully carved out of the rock and connected by tunnels. These compartments likely served as a part of a water treatment system, where water would flow from one compartment to the next, getting cleaner as it moved along. Now, here is where things start to tie into the pyramid itself. The Djoser complex has a series of underground shafts, and some researchers think that water from the moat's deep trench might have been used to power a hydraulic lift system, and this giant water-powered elevator could have been used to raise the heavy stones needed to build the pyramid. It worked like a volcano, but instead of lava, water did the heavy lifting. Imagine a big deep hole in the ground at the center of the pyramid site. Inside this hole, there was a huge wooden platform, kind of like a giant raft that could move up and down. When the workers wanted to lift a heavy stone, they would fill the hole with water. As the water rose, the wooden platform started to float up, carrying the stone with it, almost like a giant water-powered elevator. When the stone reached the right height, the workers slid it off the platform and onto the pyramid. The idea is that water from the deep trench, after being cleaned and filtered, would flow into these shafts. A massive float, possibly made of wood, would then rise as the water filled the shaft, lifting the stones up to where they were needed for construction. Once the stone was in place, they'd let the water out, lowering the platform back down to the bottom, ready to lift the next stone. This fancy hydraulic lift system could have been a game changer, making the whole building process a lot faster and more efficient without using a lot of workforce. It is like the ancient Egyptians were already embracing the whole idea of work smarter, not harder. But of course, not everyone is on board with this theory. Some experts argue that the area where the step pyramid of Djoser was built couldn't have held enough water from occasional rains to maintain such a fancy hydraulic system. The main theory suggests that, in the past, there might have been some kind of lake nearby that would have filled up after a period of rain, and this lake could have supplied water to the complex's hydraulic system. But there is no mention of such a lake in any ancient Egyptian writings, so it might be more of a what-if situation than a reality. And then there's the issue of the hard work itself. Remember when I said this method could have allowed the ancient builders to raise stones with far less effort? Well, that might not be entirely true. According to some experts, just building this hydraulic device would have required a lot more heavy work than simply moving the stone blocks using good old-fashioned manpower. And let's not forget, the step pyramid of Djoser is like a baby pyramid compared to those that came later. The stones used for Djoser's pyramid weighed, on average, about 660 pounds each, which is nothing compared to the more than 2.5-ton blocks used later for the pyramid of Chephren. If this cool water lift theory gets completely ruled out, we still need to explain how this pyramid was built in the first place. To answer that, we need to rewind a bit and talk about the original plans. See, before Djoser's tomb became a pyramid, the idea was to construct a simple mastaba. This type of tomb was pretty common in earlier periods, a flat-roofed rectangular structure with sloping sides. But after the original mastaba was finished, they decided to expand it a bit by adding more layers on top. And then they added even more layers, until the construction reached 6 distinctive steps, each one smaller than the previous. And they probably did all this by raising those heavy stones using ramps, not a water-powered elevator. There is still so much we don't know about the step pyramid of Djoser. More research is definitely needed to fully understand how this system worked, or if it even existed at all. But the idea of using water to help build the pyramid adds a whole new layer to our understanding of ancient Egyptian engineering. It's a powerful reminder of just how clever and resourceful those builders were, using the natural landscape and the power of water to create one of the most iconic monuments in history. A gruesome discovery took place in Egypt some years ago. You want to hear about it? 16 human hands, carefully buried in 4 eerie pits. They didn't look too much like human hands at first, since they were abnormally large, but they were. Weirdly, there were only right hands, no left hands were in sight. It turned out that it points to the practice of an ancient dark ritual. Old Egyptian art and tales talked of a ceremony where warriors would present the right hand of their adversaries as proof of victory and ask for gold in return. Egyptians believed in the afterlife, so cutting off someone's hand meant you cut off their power eternally. Guaranteeing this type of defeat was interesting to the winning party. Here, the fight was between Egyptians versus Hyksos, who lived in what was once known as Canaan. Egypt has always been the center of some history-changing findings, and some time ago, this papyrus was found. If we stretched it open, it would be just a tad bigger than the height of a skyscraper. The world's tiniest skyscraper, which is located in Wichita Falls, Texas. When humans didn't write on their notes app, they wrote on this thing, made from the medulla of a papyrus plant. Around 2,000 years ago, ancient Egyptians wrote something reminiscent of a book where they describe most of their funerary traditions and their visions of the afterlife. It's considered one of the most important texts from ancient Egypt and is still sold in bookstores to this day. This ancient manuscript was unearthed from a chamber located just south of the Pyramid of Djoser, located in Saqqara. Oh yes, Djoser is the oldest pyramid in Egypt and not the Giza pyramids like most people think. So recently, the site of Saqqara buzzed with excited archaeologists who probably found one of Egypt's oldest complete mummies. They believe that this beautiful and well-preserved mummy was that of a wealthy man. He was discovered in a deep shaft, covered in layers of gold leaves. There are many symbols that show he was an important and wealthy man, like the band he wore on his head, the bracelet on his chest, and the fact that he was embalmed with a tunic, which was reserved for Egypt's finest. The most exciting part of the entire discovery was finding the resting place sealed with mortar, just as the ancient Egyptians had left it 4,300 years ago. Now this may sound weird, but back in 2008, archaeologists discovered a missing pyramid. Now it went missing because it deteriorated over the span of 4,000 years. Today, you can only see its base. It was a pretty important site back in ancient times. It is said that around the area of the pyramid, the ancients hosted a special type of ceremony where high priests would carry mummified remains of sacred bulls. Now here's a fun fact. Ancient Egyptians believed that Apis bulls were earthly incarnations of the city deity of Memphis and was connected to rites of fertility. It wasn't just any Apis bull, though. They needed to be all black, with a single white mark between its horns and a bunch of very specific characteristics. They were selected by the local priests and honored until they passed away. After that, they were mummified and buried in underground galleries. Meanwhile, this missing pyramid sort of disappeared around the 1800s. It was a German archaeologist who first found it in the village of Saqqara. He called it the Headless Pyramid when he first found it. But then, years after the official discovery, the desert sand came along and covered the whole thing. There were some excavations between the 19th and 20th centuries, but they weren't too systematic. That's why scientists were so thrilled when they dug an entire pyramid's base after removing the 25-foot mound of sand that was covering it. Oh, and it turns out American archaeologists are excavating a cemetery in Egypt that could contain over 1 million mummified bodies. So far, archaeologists have dug around 1,700 mummies. One of the main differences from other classic Egyptian mummies is that these people weren't kings and pharaohs. They were commoners that most likely lived about 1,500 years ago, when Egypt was controlled by the Roman and Byzantine empires. The name of the cemetery is cool, though, the Way of the Water Buffalo, just in case you want to check it out on your next trip. Other than bulls and buffaloes, ancient Egyptians also liked baboons. Are you seeing a pattern here? In the beginning of the 20th century, archaeologists discovered a site filled with mummified baboons in a place called, guess what? The Valley of Monkeys. An animal wouldn't have been mummified if it wasn't considered important. Certain animals were more important than others, since they were linked to specific deities. Jackals were connected to Anubis, the ancient god of the afterlife, and cats were likened to the female deity Bastet. Baboons were a pretty big deal, since they were believed to be connected to Thoth, the deity of wisdom and advisor to Ra, one of Egypt's supreme deities. The archaeologists who studied these animals weren't too happy. They think these baboons were kept inside and were deprived of sunlight for most of their lives. They had extreme vitamin D deficiencies and they were poorly fed. Maybe Thoth got angry with these baboon keepers. Just a guess. Since there's never a boring day for archaeologists in Egypt, they also found human mummies with golden tongues. Since Egyptians were all about the afterlife, they believed that golden tongues might help a person speak once they pass to the other side. I mean, it's a long shot, but hey, why not? Some of these mummies were placed in wooden coffins with goods, such as necklaces, pottery, golden artifacts in the shape of lotus flowers and scarab beetles, and iPhones. Just kidding. A new temple was also unearthed recently in Egypt. Scientists believe it was dedicated to honor Zeus Cassios. That deity would be a cross between Zeus, the almighty Greek deity of the sky, and Mount Cassios. While digging around the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, archaeologists spotted 2 pink granite columns poking out of the ground, and bingo. They believe these columns represented the temple's front gate and collapsed during an earthquake many years ago. And speaking of deities, there weren't only super serious deities. Recently, scientists unearthed a golden ring in a city south of Cairo. No, Frodo, it's not magical. It was a normal gold ring, but it had the depiction of the deity of fun, officially named Bes. This deity is often described in sacred texts as a happy, chubby dwarf. Today, many tattoos we get are sorta deprived of any sense and are made of aesthetic purposes only. In ancient Egypt, though, women would get tattoos as a token of protection for childbirth. That's what scientists think, at least. Around the Nile region, scientists found some mummies that had well-preserved tattoos, which is a rarity since the skin deteriorates so easily. 2 of these women tattooed their lower backs, and the drawings were simple. They were mostly pictures, including that same chubby dwarf we just talked about, Bes. He also had a side hustle as the protector of women during childbirth. Now, would you believe me if I told you ancient Egyptians invented robots? No? Well, that's because that's not entirely true. Sure, they were astronomers, mathematicians, and engineers, and somehow they also squeezed an eccentric invention into that package – an automated deity some scientists called Hathor. This wooden statue had been in the Metropolitan Museum of Art for years before someone noticed its secret. With the help of an X-ray machine, specialists discovered a mechanical operating system inside it. The pulley-like axis goes from the statue's shoulder to her left leg. When the system rotates, the statue raises and lowers her hand. Hey, pick me! Pick me! I got my hand up here. We know that the ancient Egyptians were talented enough to build something as grand as the pyramids, but were they also smart enough to measure the speed of light? There's a theory circulating online that says exactly that. If you look at these 2 numbers, you'll see that they match completely. The first one is the speed of light in a vacuum measured in meters, and the second one is the latitude of the Great Pyramid of Giza. So, was it done on purpose, or is it just a coincidence? Well, happily, we can tell you that it's actually just a coincidence, not another conspiracy thingy. The Great Pyramid is just one of the many places in the world that share the same latitude. And more importantly, even if the ancient Egyptians had somehow measured the speed of light and chosen to keep it a secret from the rest of the world, they wouldn't have used meters to put it down. Meters were only defined at the end of the 18th century. The builders of the pyramids used a different unit of measure called cubits. 1 cubit is equal to 1.5 feet. Cubit was based on the length of the arm from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, and it became popular in the ancient world. So if they wanted to impress the rest of the world and set the pyramids at a point that matched the speed of light in cubits, they would have to build their iconic constructions somewhere in Europe. And then the Danish astronomer who first measured the speed of light in 1676 would have been really upset to know that someone had done it centuries before him. So, although they were ahead of their time in many aspects, the ancient Egyptians never measured the speed of light or used longitude and latitude to map their locations. The base of the Great Pyramid of Giza might seem like a perfect square, but it's actually an 8-sided structure, not 4-sided. Each of its 4 sides has a subtle concave indentation that splits it evenly from base to tip. The official version is that a British pilot was the first to notice it in 1940 while flying over the pyramid. He took a photograph that showed shadows highlighting these indentations. Some people think these lines are only visible from above and can best be seen at dawn and dusk during the spring and autumn equinoxes. This has led to a freaky theory that the ancient Egyptians might have designed the pyramids to communicate with something looking at them from above. Now, the Great Pyramid is one of only 3 pyramids that used to have a swivel door. It weighed around 20 tons, but they could still easily open it from the inside. Its precise fit made it nearly invisible from the outside, with no visible latch or handle. There were only slight variations in the exterior stone that gave out an opening. The other 2 pyramids with similar doors belonged to Khufu's father and grandfather. The Great Pyramid also has a hidden void at least 100 feet long that was only found in 2017. We still don't know what lies within the space, what purpose it served, or if it is the only space of its kind. Researchers used the same tech to see through cathedral walls, Mayan pyramids, and even volcanoes. It depends on a natural shower of subatomic particles called muons. They pass more easily through empty space than through solid materials. So if they arrange multiple muon detectors around a structure, scientists can map out its solid and empty areas. A team of scientists placed muon detectors inside the Great Pyramid and allowed them to gather data for months. Scientists have analyzed samples of the mortar used to build the pyramids many times. Although we know its composition, modern technology still can't replicate it. The mortar is mostly made from processed gypsum, but it wasn't used like the cement we use for bricks today. Instead, they used it to support the joints between the massive stones as they were set in place. The estimated amount they needed to construct the Great Pyramid was around 500,000 tons of mortar. The gypsum mortar is stronger than the stones themselves and has held up for thousands of years. Now, all four sides of the Great Pyramid are aligned with the cardinal points – north, south, east, and west. According to geologist and engineer Glenn Dash, the alignment is accurate to within 4 minutes of arc, or 1/15th of a degree. The architects managed to achieve this without modern tools like drones, blueprints, or computers. Many researchers try to explain this construction miracle. Maybe they used the pole star or the sun's shadow. Dash recently proposed a new, simpler idea. The Egyptians might have used the autumnal equinox to align the pyramids. It happens twice a year when the Earth's equator passes through the center of the sun's disk, making day and night nearly equal in length. To test his theory, Dash conducted an experiment on the 22nd of September 2016, the first day of the fall equinox. He used a special rod the Egyptians had to cast a shadow and tracked its tip at regular intervals, forming a smooth curve. By connecting 2 points of the curve with a taut string, he created an almost perfect east-west line. Dash noted that on the equinox, the shadow's tip runs in a straight line, nearly perfectly east-west, and with a slight counterclockwise error. There's a similar error in the pyramids. Although his experiment was conducted in Connecticut, Dash believes that the same method would work in Egypt. All the ancient Egyptians needed was a clear, sunny day. They could determine the fall equinox by counting 91 days from the summer solstice. But they left us few clues, and no engineering documents or architectural plans have been found that explain their methods. So they might have mapped shadows, but it's not definite. Now, scientists have long wondered how heavy stone blocks were carried to the pyramid sites, and they might finally have an answer. A research team from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, has discovered that 31 pyramids are likely to have been built along a long-lost ancient branch of the River Nile. It's now hidden under desert and farmland. For many years, archaeologists have thought that ancient Egyptians must have used a nearby waterway to transport materials, equipment, people, and whatever else they needed to build the pyramids on the river. But up until now, they weren't certain of the location, shape, size, or proximity of this waterway to the site of the pyramids. The group of researchers used radar satellite imagery, historical maps, geophysical surveys, and sediment coring to map the river branch. They believe it was buried by a major drought and sandstorms thousands of years ago. The team managed to go below the sand surface and get images of some hidden features thanks to radar technology. They found hidden rivers and ancient structures running at the foothills of where most of the ancient Egyptian pyramids lie. The discovery of this extinct river branch helps explain the high pyramid density between Giza and Lisht, in what is now an inhospitable area of the Sahara Desert. Now, Egypt isn't the only country with the most pyramids in the world. The champion's title here goes to its southern neighbor, Sudan. It has between 200 and 255 pyramids, compared to Egypt's measly 138. They were built by members of the Kingdom of Kush, an ancient civilization that ruled the lands along the Nile River many years ago. They started erecting pyramids around 500 years after the Egyptians had stopped doing it. Their pyramids are much smaller than the Egyptian ones, but were built for the same purposes. Archaeologists are still working to find out how the pyramids in the Sudan were built, how long it took to complete them, and what happened to their society.
It's 1898, and you're taking part in excavations in Saqqara. This place, not far away from Cairo, is full of ancient tombs and pyramids. You're in your Indiana Jones mood and hope to find something really phenomenal to become famous. Gold, manuscripts, treasure maps, mummies of famous pharaohs. Wait, a wooden bird? You're really disappointed as it looks like a regular toy. An old one, but still. Little do you know that years later, someone would propose that your bird was actually an ancient monoplane. So the artifact, nicknamed the Saqqara bird, is made of a sycamore tree. The birdie has a wingspan of just 7 inches and weighs around 40 grams. A perfect original souvenir from Egypt, I would say. It's over 2,000 years old and looks pretty plain, without any carvings of feathers or other intricate ornaments. It has a beak and eyes, though, which makes our find look like a hawk, the emblem of the deity Horus. Its tail is rather unusual as it's squared, looks weirdly upright, and it seems like the sunken part of it was the place for a now missing piece. Humans love solving a good mystery, so there have been several attempts to explain the use of the birdie. First, quite simply, is that it was a ceremonial object. The second idea is that it was a toy for a child from some well-off family. It could have been some sort of boomerang, which was a popular concept in ancient Egypt. Then there was a theory that the bird had been used as a weather vane. But this one has been debunked as the figure doesn't have any holes or markings, except for the one made at the museum in Cairo to fix the exhibit on a stick. So there was no way to hang it in the past. Almost a century after the bird was found, Egyptologist Dr. Khalil Masiha proposed a new theory that it could have been a model of a monoplane. He believed the bird was missing a horizontal tailplane. Otherwise, it had its wings set at a right angle, similar to that of modern planes. It could have worked to generate the aerodynamic lift necessary for flights. Dr. Masiha also claimed that it was common at that time to place miniature models of technological inventions in tombs. So, did the ancient Egyptians really invent the plane in 200 BCE? That would make the Wright brothers, who are considered the inventors of aviation, really upset. They made one of their first flights only in 1903. There's just one way to know for sure, and that is to test the model. But you know, the ancient museum in Cairo would unlikely let one of their cherished exhibits fly around like a toy. That's why glider designer Martin Gregory built a similar model, this time of balsa wood, and concluded that even with the missing tailplane, the plane wasn't much of a flyer. Case solved? Not really. This didn't sound convincing enough to the History Channel, so they invited an aerodynamics expert to build another replica of the bird. He tested it in weather conditions similar to those in Egypt and was impressed with the little plane's abilities. So, if they did invent the prototype of a plane back in the times of pharaohs, it would be a good example of an oupart. That's an out-of-place artifact, an object that's way ahead of its time in terms of technology or history. And the Saqqara bird isn't the only example of such a revolutionary concept. In 1901, a group of divers retrieved the Antikythera mechanism from an underwater shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. It's been dubbed the world's first analog computer, and it's currently dated around 100 BCE. The bronze mechanism could tell the position of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, as well as the lunar phase, the dates of upcoming solar eclipses, and even the speed at which the moon moves through the sky. No one's sure who used it and how or where it was made, but it's obvious that it's extremely precise and way too advanced for its time. The first flushing toilets in the world were invented in the middle of the 20th century. Just kidding. The ancient Minoans on the Mediterranean island of Crete and the Indus Valley civilization both came up with this brilliant invention at the same time, around 4,000 years ago. The plumbing and sanitation were so well done that no one managed to design anything better until 2,000 years later. One ancient Minoan lavatory was discovered at the Palace of Knossos. It looks like it had a wooden seat set over a tunnel that directed water from a rooftop reservoir to an underground sewer. Other varieties got water from jugs. Only the super rich people could afford all this glory. So if you wanted to shop for real estate back then, The flushing toilet would be a telltale sign you were in the rich neighborhood. Automated doors became a cool, seemingly new invention back in 1931. But the technology behind them is actually much older. Think the 1st century CE old. Mathematician and engineer Heron of Alexandria came up with a hydraulic system to open and close temple doors. To bring it into action, you need to light a fire to produce heat. There was a brass pot under the fire, half filled with water. The inventor connected the brass pot to containers that acted as weights. When the fire was burning, the water moved into the containers. They went down and pulled the ropes. It was nothing like a supermarket door that opens in front of you before you even have time to think. Heron's door took hours to open, and there was no way to stop the process. That's why they only opened the doors once a day before people entered the temple, to add some mysticism at the temple during ceremonies. Spooky. Looks like the first ever battery was invented in Baghdad around 2,000 years ago. A German archaeologist found this oval-shaped clay jar in 1938. Scientists are still not sure what purpose it served and who exactly invented it. There is a theory that it was used for electroplating objects with precious metals. When they filled it with a weak acid like vinegar, the battery produced around 1 volt of electricity. Another theory says it was a vessel for sacred scrolls. Would you like to buy contact lenses designed by Leonardo da Vinci himself? In 1508, he invented a glass lens with a funnel on one side. You were supposed to wear it with water inside to improve your vision. Sounds a bit uncomfortable, doesn't it? So, around a century later, French scientist René Descartes decided to improve the idea and make the cornea contact the future lenses. Contacts because they contact your eyes, get it? The glass tube with liquid did help improve vision, but blinking was sadly impossible. 2.5 centuries later, new technologies in the glass industry let scientists design contacts that would fit in the eye and even let the wearer blink. Thanks, guys! Still, those lenses were made of heavy blown glass and didn't let the eye breathe. About 50 years later, contacts became plastic. Lightweight, unbreakable, and scratch-resistant, but still covering the entire eye. And then, in 1948, an English optical technician accidentally sanded down a plastic lens and figured out they'd still be in place even if they covered only the cornea. Imagine you're living in 19th century London and need to send a message to New York. It would have taken about 10 days to get there by ship. So when delivery time went from days to hours in 1858, it was a true sensation. The first message was sent by Queen Victoria herself. It was all made possible thanks to the transatlantic telegraph cable, running under the ocean. Sadly, the new cool invention only lasted a few weeks. It took years to bring it back to life.
One of the greatest mysteries in human history is probably the origins of the Great Pyramid of Giza. This massive, awe-inspiring structure has been puzzling pretty much everyone for thousands of years. How did ancient engineers, without modern tools or machines, manage to pull off something so jaw-droppingly monumental? Could it be that they had a bit of extraterrestrial help? We'll dwell on this theory a bit later, but first, how about one of the more traditonal explanations? It claims that ancient workers could have built massive ramps to haul giant stones up to the pyramid's higher levels. It sounds reasonable until you find out that there's barely any archaeological evidence for these ramps. Sure, smaller ramps might have been used, but huge, miles-long ramps? Not likely. And even if they had existed, they would have been an enormous feat in themselves, since the builders would have needed almost as much material for the ramp as for the pyramid itself. This is where things get interesting. Since the ramp theory doesn't fully hold up, we're left with an even bigger mystery. How did the Egyptians move millions of multi-ton stones with such precision? Well, some people point to extraterrestrial visitors. The idea that aliens might have been behind the construction of the pyramids has existed for decades. According to this theory, the pyramids were just too advanced for humans to have built on their own. The precision of the architecture, the sheer scale of the project, and the mysterious mathematical principles at play have made many people believe that some outside force must have lent a hand. One of the biggest arguments the supporters of this theory have is that building something as perfect as the Great Pyramid would have required a bird's eye view. And who could have had that view? Certainly not humans, but maybe a spaceship. Aliens could have hovered above, guiding the construction. If you thought things couldn't get any more mysterious, let's talk about the golden ratio. A mathematical principle you can meet everywhere in nature, from seashells to galaxies. And the Great Pyramid's proportions seem to align almost perfectly with the golden ratio. Alien theorists point to this as evidence that the Egyptians couldn't have pulled this off without some extraterrestrial help. Some people even went so far as to claim that alien remains had been found inside the Great Pyramid. But before you get too excited, keep in mind that there's no solid evidence to back this up. And still, let's take a closer look inside the Great Pyramid. If the exterior is impressive, the interior is downright mind-blowing. It's a labyrinth of tunnels, shafts, and chambers so complex that it's no wonder people have speculated about alien involvement. How could ancient humans have designed something so intricate and mysterious? Some believers say this is further proof that the pyramids were more than just tombs. They were either built or influenced by some kind of divine or extraterrestrial intelligence. And now, let's get into one of the wildest ideas. What if the pyramids were built to align with the stars or even act as part of an ancient space elevator? Some theorists suggest that the pyramids were aligned with certain constellations and served as landing sites for alien spacecraft. Come to think about it, the site indeed sounds like a cosmic airport. All those sharp angles, the perfect geometry, the precise alignment with the stars. Others go even further, proposing that the pyramids were part of a long-lost spacefaring technology. They could have been used to harness energy from stars or served as gateways between worlds. So, are the pyramids really ancient alien landing sites? Were they part of a cosmic energy grid? So far, there's no scientific proof to support these ideas. The Great Pyramid, with all its secrets and unanswered questions, continues to captivate everyone's attention. It's a reminder that there are still things in this world, and maybe beyond it, that we just don't fully understand. There are several places on Earth, awesome and mysterious, that evoke so many questions that some people believe they were built by or with the help of extraterrestrial intelligence. Let's explore those mystical destinations. In the hills above Cusco, Peru, you'll find an ancient Inca fortress called Sacsayhuaman. Some of the massive stones of its walls weigh as much as 360 tons. They're cut and fitted together surprisingly precisely, and no mortar is used. The stones used for this construction were transported over 20 miles from quarries. But how did the Inca do it? Did they ask for extraterrestrial help? Perhaps. But archaeologists disagree. They have found evidence that the Inca used advanced engineering techniques involving ropes and levers to move and fit the stones. Okay, let's move on to the Nazca lines. You can see them in the deserts of southern Peru. In this area, more than 800 lines and 300 shapes stretch across the deserted landscape. Those are called geoglyphs and are best viewed from the sky. That's how theories about alien involvement popped up. The lines were made by removing the top layer of reddish rocks to reveal the lighter ground beneath. And this is a pretty simple technique. You don't even need to use modern tools. The purpose of the Nazca lines is still a mystery, but most experts believe that they had some ceremonial significance. Now, the stone circle of Stonehenge must have something to do with extraterrestrial visitors, right? Those stones, some weighing as much as 50 tons, were brought from quarries hundreds of miles away. No wonder many people offered theories about alien intervention. Well, sorry to disappoint you, but archaeologists have proven that the monument could have actually been built with the help of technologies available around 5,000 years ago, such as wooden sleds and rollers. The exact purpose of Stonehenge is still under debate. Its builders could have used the stone circle to track the sun or to perform astronomy-related rituals. The next breath-stopping place on our list is the Egyptian pyramids, namely the pyramids of Giza just outside Cairo. They were built over 4,500 years ago. The largest of them, the Great Pyramid, is made of millions of 2-ton stones which are arranged with super precision. The pyramids also align with the stars of Orion's belt, and this makes some people believe that aliens might have helped to build these awe-inspiring constructions. Experts disagree. They say that although the exact methods the Egyptian builders used are still unclear, the pyramids are undoubtedly a human achievement. Ramps, levers, and a large workforce were likely used to move the stones into place. Then, how about Teotihuacan, located near modern-day Mexico City? Once, it was a thriving metropolis. The city was built more than 2,000 years ago, and its size and advanced architecture make people wonder if aliens played a key role in its construction. In reality, the city was created by several cultures, including the Maya and Zapotec. It was a center for trade, agriculture, and other activities, but it does have some connection to space. Its layout, with the pyramids aligned to celestial events, shows a deep understanding of astronomy. And still, it was the work of human hands. Now, let's travel to one of the most mysterious islands in the world, Easter Island. Nearly 900 stone figures known as moai stand there, some towering over 30 feet tall. These statues were carved from volcanic rock more than 1,000 years ago and moved across the island to their final resting places. This impressive feat, as well as the slightly creepy appearance of the figures, makes you think about some alien intervention, doesn't it? Well, another disappointment. It's believed that the Rapa Nui people used wooden sleds or rolling logs to transport the statues, and there's no evidence that extraterrestrials were involved. The last destination isn't even on Earth. In 1976, NASA's Viking 1 orbiter captured an image of what seemed to be a face on Mars. It sparked numerous theories about alien activity. The face seems to be staring up from the Martian surface, like evidence of the activity of an ancient alien civilization. But more detailed images from 2001, taken by the Mars Global Surveyor, revealed that the so-called face was just a natural mesa, an isolated flat-topped hill with steep sides. One of the biggest questions that has been torturing the minds of astronomers and common folks is, why haven't we found aliens yet? You'd think with a universe so big and filled with tons of stars and planets, we'd have already bumped into some extraterrestrial neighbors by now. This question was first asked by famous physicist Enrico Fermi during a lunch with his fellow scientists. They were chatting about UFO sightings and aliens, and suddenly Fermi asked, "Where is everyone?" It seemed like a casual comment, but it sparked a huge debate. If the universe is packed with stars, planets, and the possibility of alien life, how come we haven't seen any yet? This discussion gave birth to something we now call the Fermi paradox. It goes like this. Based on what we know, there should be advanced alien civilizations out there, perhaps even many of them. They'd likely have technology that could allow them to travel across space or at least send us signals to let us know they're there. But here's the kicker. Despite all of our technology and all the searching we've done, we haven't found a single shred of solid proof that these advanced civilizations do exist. So where are they? Over the years, a lot of theories trying to explain this paradox have seen the light of day. Let's talk about some of the most interesting ones. The rare Earth hypothesis claims that Earth might just be super rare, and planets like ours, with life, are incredibly uncommon. In this case, we could be the only planet in the Milky Way harboring life, or at least intelligent life. We might also be the first intelligent civilization in our galaxy to reach this level of development. In other words, we could be pioneers, however unbelievable it may sound. At the same time, it's not very scientific to rely on a rare chance. Some people think that maybe advanced civilizations were once here, but left the Milky Way. Perhaps they developed the technology of interstellar travel, enabling them to fly between galaxies. Or they could use other exotic ways, like wormholes, hypothetical structures connecting disparate points in space-time. Maybe they found more interesting and pleasant places to live far away from us. One sad possibility is that when a civilization becomes too advanced, it ends up destroying itself. Whether through war, environmental destruction, or something else, it could be that most civilizations don't last long enough to reach out to others. Now, imagine an advanced civilization being wiped out by a disease before they could even start exploring stars. In other words, it's possible that civilizations just don't survive long enough to meet others. Another hypothesis, not very flattering to us. What if these aliens are using technology that we just don't understand? Maybe they're communicating in ways we can't detect, like using signals beyond our current understanding of physics. Scientists are discussing such possibilities, but haven't found any yet. Aliens might also be intentionally avoiding us. They could be out there but staying silent, not so eager to reveal themselves until we're ready. Speaking of being ready, some people think that aliens could be waiting for us to reach a certain level of development before they make contact. Maybe they don't want to interfere with our growth until we're more advanced. Advanced civilizations could also go into virtual realities. And if they can live in digital worlds, they might stop caring about exploring the physical universe. Why bother? Another wild idea is that some civilizations might go into a type of hibernation, waiting for the universe to cool down, because it might be more energy efficient to do so. And last but not least, there's this creepy possibility that our entire universe is a computer simulation, and aliens are hidden from us on purpose. It's something like a video game that doesn't reveal all its secrets at once until you get to the next level. Now let's talk about the odds of life out there. We know that in just our galaxy, the Milky Way, there are probably around 20 billion planets that are roughly Earth-sized and located in the habitable zone, which means they're just the right distance from their stars to have liquid water. But how many of these planets actually have life? Could it be most of them, just a few, or almost none? And out of the planets that do have life, how many host intelligent beings with technology? In the 1960s, a scientist named Dr. Frank Drake tried to estimate the number of civilizations in our galaxy that could contact us. He came up with a famous equation, later called the Drake equation. It looks complicated, but the idea is pretty simple. It helps us calculate the number of intelligent civilizations based on things like how many stars are born each year, how many have planets, how many planets could support life, and how long a civilization might last. Here's what it looks like. Let's look into this equation in more detail. N is the number of intelligent civilizations that could contact us. R is the rate of star formation in our galaxy. FP is the fraction of stars with planets. NE is the average number of planets per star that could support life. FL is the fraction of those planets where life actually develops. Fi is the fraction where intelligent life arises. FC is the fraction of civilizations that can and want to communicate. L is how long these civilizations last before they disappear. The problem is, we don't know the exact values for most of these factors. So when we plug in numbers, which we know with large errors, we get answers with very large errors too. Depending on the values, the number of civilizations in our galaxy could be anywhere from almost 0 to tens of thousands. Right now, the best estimate we can come up with gives us a very small number, close to 0. In other words, even though our galaxy is huge, it's possible we're all alone here. Or nearly alone. One big reason we haven't met any aliens yet is that even if they do exist, we might not be able to visit them, at least not with our current technology. The speed of light is a hard limit in physics, meaning nothing can travel faster than it. This makes interstellar travel super slow. The situation could be better if there were exotic ways of travel, such as wormholes and warp drives. One day, they may turn out to be real, but so far, there is little hope for that. Even if we can't meet aliens face to face, there are still ways we might discover them. One of the biggest projects is called SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. SETI scientists use huge telescopes to listen for radio signals from distant planets. If an alien civilization is sending out signals, we might be able to pick them up. And if we have a very powerful telescope, we might use it to take super detailed pictures of distant planets, maybe even Earth-like ones, hundreds of light years away. This could give us a whole new way to search for signs of alien life. In any case, even though we haven't found aliens yet, the search is far from over. Whether it's through new technology, better understanding of physics, or just listening to the stars, we might one day find that we're not alone in the universe. Until then, the question, where is everyone, keeps sparking curiosity.
Imagine you could travel through the universe by hitching a ride on space dust, meteoroids, comets, or even rogue planets. Wouldn't it be incredibly cool? This idea is known as Panspermia. It has captivated minds for centuries,
but despite its appeal, it hasn't gained much popularity among mainstream scientists. Mainly, it could be because it doesn't explain how life originated and isn't easily testable. At the same time, certain events have reignited interest in the theory, even among skeptics. And one of such events was the appearance of the mysterious Oumuamua in our solar system in 2017. Oumuamua was a mysterious object that zipped through the solar system at an astounding speed. It was the first interstellar object spotted passing through our star system and the first detected hyperbolic asteroid, an object with an orbit not bound to the sun. Observations indicated that Oumuamua was likely to be a highly elongated cigar-like object. Overall, it was a very unusual object. Scientists couldn't quite pin down what it was. Some of them suggested it was a comet, others bet it was an asteroid, and there were those who thought it might be a chunk of frozen hydrogen. In April 2020, astronomers presented a new possible scenario for the object's origin. According to one hypothesis, Oumuamua could be a fragment from a tidally disrupted planet. If true, this would make Oumuamua a rare object of a type much less abundant than most extrasolar dusty snowball comets or asteroids. What made Oumuamua especially interesting to those who support the Panspermia theory is that it was a visitor from another star system, so it was possible that it could have carried life across the galaxy. The idea of panspermia advances 3 stages: escape from a planet, transit through interplanetary space, and landing on another planet. Therefore, the Oumuamua hints that panspermia is possible. Recently, a new study titled The Implications of Oumuamua on Panspermia has seen the light of day. It was led by David Tsao from Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, an intern at Johns Hopkins University. The study explored how many objects like Oumuamua might exist and what characteristics they would need to transport life safely across the cosmos. The researchers considered different types of space debris, such as asteroids and comets, and estimated their potential to shield life from harmful radiation, particularly gamma rays from supernovae. If these objects weren't large enough, the intense radiation would sterilize any microorganisms hitching a ride. According to their findings, space debris made of materials like nickel or silicate could provide sufficient protection. But for a passenger to survive, they would need to have a minimum size of about 21 feet. The study also tried to estimate how likely it was that extremophiles organisms that can survive in extreme environments could have been delivered to Earth in this way. They calculated that roughly 40,000 objects of at least 33 feet in diameter could have impacted Earth during its first 800 million years. While this number might sound like a lot, the chances that Earth itself was seeded by panspermia are extremely low, less than 0.001%, according to the study. Interestingly, the researchers didn't just consider Earth as a recipient of panspermia, but also as a potential source. If Earth or another habitable planet ejected life-bearing material into space, that material could, in theory, seed other planets across the galaxy. The study suggests that under optimistic conditions, up to 100,000 Earth-like planets in the Milky Way could host life as a result of panspermia. However, many factors remain uncertain. For instance, the number of rogue or free-floating planets in the galaxy could significantly affect the panspermia hypothesis. Hopefully, when we discover more about these planets and the overall density of interstellar material, we will understand more about panspermia. The scientists have also underlined that the conditions in the galaxy were different in the past. For example, during an event known as the Late Heavy Bombardment, the rate of impacts on Earth and other bodies in the solar system was 100 to 500 times higher than it is today. If similar events occurred in other star systems, the potential for panspermia would be much greater. Despite its allure, the panspermia theory remains a fringe idea in scientific circles, all because of the many unknowns and its speculative nature. But as we gather more data from projects like the upcoming Rubin Observatory's Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, which is expected to detect many more interstellar objects and rogue planets. Astronomers will likely revisit and reassess this idea. Venus is often called Earth's evil twin. The thing is, this world once started off quite similar to our home planet. But later, something went wrong. These days, the two planets are relatively close and similar in size. But Venus's atmosphere is very different from that on our planet, all thanks to a runaway greenhouse effect that has been going on for a long time. The surface of Venus can get even hotter than the surface of Mercury, 864 degrees F. And the surface pressure feels as if you're more than half a mile underwater. The thick atmosphere presents its own challenges. Its clouds consist of sulfuric acid, which is used in lead-acid batteries, as well as industrial cleaners. And if you decided to land on the planet, you'd have to survive atmospheric entry, with friction heating you up to 20,000 degrees F. Still, people have always wanted to explore this inhospitable world. And we can't but talk about the Venera program. During the 1970s and 1980s, several spacecraft studied Venus from orbit and from its hostile surface for an hour or so at a time. The 10 successful Venera landers provided us with most of the data we have today about the surface of this mysterious planet, including surface composition, direct measurements of atmospheric conditions, and sets of unique images. At the same time, astronomers got their hands on these treasures only after a series of annoying failures. They started with Venera 1, launched in February 1961. Each consequent spacecraft was somehow improved and upgraded. But it still wasn't until the fifth group of Venus-bound space probes launched in 1967 that one of them, Venera 4, reached its target and sent data from Venus. Before that, Venera 2 and 3, launched in November 1965, were supposed to land on Venus, but both of them failed in transit. 11-foot-tall Venera 4 was a hefty thing. Its bottom lander was a bunch of instruments and a battery wrapped up in a pressure shell equipped with a parachute. This probe reached Venus in October 1967 and successfully launched the lander. The mother spaceship sent the probe flying over the planet, and it entered Venus's atmosphere. Temperatures were reaching 20,000 degrees F, and the entry force was as great as 450 G. It didn't prevent the onboard instruments from analyzing the atmosphere and sending back data. The first recorded temperature was 102 degrees F, and atmospheric pressure was similar to that on Earth. But the deeper the probe went, the higher the numbers became. 10 atmospheres, 20. They kept going up much higher than engineers had anticipated. 93 minutes into the mission, when the probe was still more than 16 miles above the surface of the planet, Venera 4 cracked open near its top and crashed. At the crash point, the measurements showed 22 atmospheres and 530 degrees F. Scientists realized that they needed a bigger spaceship. After some intense engineering, Venera 5 and Venera 6 saw the light of the day. Engineers did everything they could to make the landing probe stronger, but they were pressed for time. That's why Venera 5 and 6 were not fully prepared when they went on a mission. That's why Venera 5 transmitted data for a mere 53 minutes before succumbing to temperatures of 600 degrees F and pressures of 27 atmospheres. And Venera 6 lasted for 51 minutes. In any case now, the leaders of the project knew what it would take. 840 degrees F, 100 atmospheres, corrosive acids. They seemed to be prepared. They found new materials to build the probe. They got a hotter and stronger test chamber for the trials. They modified the parachute to make the lander fall faster so that the probe could spend as much time on the surface as possible. The lander was also designed in the shape of an egg and made of titanium, so its surface was smooth and had just a few ports, welds, and substructures. The insides were lined with a shock absorber and insulation layer. The chamber was also to pre-chill to freezing temperatures before entry. And Venera 7 was finally a success. It reached the planet in December 1970, separated from the mothership, and went down into the atmosphere. The probe transmitted data for 35 minutes, and things seemed smooth. But then, its chute melted, and the probe dropped like a rock, hitting the ground at 35 miles per hour and bouncing. Then, a second after the landing, the signal was abruptly cut. It looked like the probe crashed to bits. Shockingly, a few months later, while looking through all the data they managed to get, engineers rediscovered the signal. It was super weak and lost amidst the noise. Apparently, when Venera 7 bounced, it misaligned the antenna. The probe rested on its side, which weakened the signal to 1 or 3% of its initial strength. The probe kept transmitting data for 23 minutes. After that, the temperatures got too high and melted its shell. Venera 8, launched in 1972, had a similar design and experienced a similar fate. Venera 9 and 10 were a new generation of probes. They could send back black and white photos. It was actually the probe's main goal, to send the first ever photographic panorama from another planet. Venera 9 and 10 were 5 times heavier than their predecessors and weighed 5 tons at launch. The lander was 6.5 feet tall. It was basically a hermetically sealed titanium sphere that was supposed to hold the instruments. It was bolted with gold wire seals. Inside, there were shelves of beryllium and electric fans, whose main goal was to disperse heat to prevent instrument failure. On the bottom of the lander, there was a shock-absorbing ring. And at the top, there was a titanium ring that looked like a hat. It served as an aero brake. The parachute was supposed to detach at 30 miles above the surface, and the aero brake had to do the rest. In October 1975, Venera 9 and 10 arrived at Venus and landed as planned. Venera 9 was the first to land. It touched down on a slight slope, a volcanic crater or a hill, and kicked quite a bit of dust while landing. One of its 2 cameras succeeded in photographing and transmitting data, and soon scientists saw the first ever pictures of the surface of Venus. It was mostly sharp rocks, soil, and a distant horizon. The sun was slightly obscured by clouds that day. A gentle breeze was blowing. Overall, it was a pleasant morning. If you didn't pay attention to crushing pressure, almost completely waterless atmosphere, insanely high temperatures, and corrosive acids. Venera 10 landed in the same way a few days later, but the terrain it landed on was much more boring. Just a rolling plain with hardened pieces of magma. Both probes transmitted for 40 to 60 minutes until their orbiters went out of range. When it happened, the temperatures inside the probes were reaching 140 degrees F. The orbiters later burned up in the atmosphere after completing their mission. Venera 11 and 12 could have been a success, but a mysterious electric anomaly messed up with their cameras, so their trip was quickly forgotten. And Venera 13 and 14 entered the picture. They had improved scientific instruments and cameras that could take color images, and new heat-resistant technologies were used during the creation of these probes. Venera 13 arrived first and landed as planned. It took 2 photos, one black and white and the other in color. In the photos, one could see a surface of pebbled, loose soil and outcroppings of bedrock. It all looked pretty similar to the surface of the ocean. In the distance, there were rolling plateaus and an orange sky. The images taken later by Venera 14 showed a more weathered plain with less loose soil and fine-grained rocks. The 2 probes also sent back what they heard. It mostly sounded like a gently blowing wind with hints of distant rumbling. Could be Venus quakes. Venera 13 and 14 were the last landers to touch the surface of the planet. Venera 15 and 16 just flew around Venus, mapping its topography from orbit.